Before getting into today's stories, let me know where everyone is from and what time so we can send wishes of health and luck to you and your relatives and friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos of our channel. Thank you very much, everyone. Let's get started. Story 1. It was the winter of my 20th year, a season I thought I understood until I moved to northern Michigan. Back in Illinois, winter had meant frosted windows and crisp air, but here, the cold felt alive, hunting and biting at every inch of exposed skin. "You'll get used to it," the landlord said, handing me the keys to my new apartment. The old wooden structure creaked as if protesting my arrival. The paint on the walls was chipped, and the single-pane windows offered little defense against the bitter winds outside. "What if I don't?" I joked, forcing a smile. His eyes narrowed slightly, his lips curling into a smirk. "Then you'll learn to endure," he replied. His voice carried a weight that settled uneasily in the air. The apartment was on the edge of town, a 30-minute walk from the retail store where I had found a job. I'd taken the apartment because it was cheap, but the isolation felt heavier than I expected. The bus only ran during the day, and after my late shifts, I had to walk home alone in the dark. The first storm hit hard. Snow piled against the windows, the wind howled like a wounded animal, and the temperature plummeted. I pulled my coat tighter as I trudged home one night, the street lamps casting long, distorted shadows on the snow-covered sidewalks. As I neared my building, I noticed a figure standing at the corner. The man was dressed in layers of tattered clothing, a scarf obscuring most of his face. He stood motionless, staring at something or someone in the distance. I hesitated, clutching my bag tightly, but he didn't move as I passed. "Evening," I mumbled, my breath fogging in the freezing air. No response. I quickened my pace and didn't look back. The nights grew colder, the wind louder. One evening, as I was locking up the store, my coworker Mia turned to me. "You're walking home again?" she asked, her brows knitting together in concern. "It's just a short walk," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Besides, I've got my scarf." "I heard something weird on the news," she said, lowering her voice. "A guy was found wandering near the woods last week. He'd been out there for days talking nonsense about someone following him. They said his clothes were shredded like he'd been running through thorns." "We're surrounded by trees," I said, attempting a laugh. "Probably just some drunk hunter." Mia didn't laugh. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They found scratches on his arms and legs, deep ones, like claws, and he kept muttering about a man with no eyes." She looked at me, her face pale. "Maybe it's nothing, but be careful, okay?" I hesitated, forcing a nervous smile. "I'll be fine. It's just a story, right?" Mia grabbed my arm before I could turn away. "It's not just a story. My cousin works at the hospital where they brought him. She said he died screaming. That night, the snow fell heavy and thick, muffling the world around me. My boots crunched loudly with each step, and I found myself looking over my shoulder more often than usual. The street lamps flickered, their light struggling to pierce the swirling snow. I was halfway home when I heard it, the crunch of footsteps in the snow behind me. At first, I thought it was an echo, but as I stopped, the sound continued, steady, deliberate. "Hello," I called, my voice trembling slightly. There was no reply. I scanned the darkened street but saw nothing, just the wind and the snow. The footsteps resumed as soon as I did, and this time they were faster, closer. I turned abruptly, my heart pounding. A shadow darted behind a tree at the edge of the sidewalk. "Hey, who's there?" I demanded, gripping my keys like a weapon. Silence. The wind howled, carrying with it the faint sound of something laughing. My hands tightened around the keys. "I'm serious. Come out." My voice echoed down the empty street, but the only response was the whistle of the wind. I took a shaky step backward, keeping my eyes on the tree. Then a voice, low, gravelly, and far too close. "Why are you afraid?" I spun around, but there was no one there. My breath came in short, sharp gasps as I stumbled forward, forcing myself to move. "Stay calm," I muttered to myself. "Just get home." The laughter came again, louder this time, echoing from all directions. "Don't leave. We're just getting started." When I finally reached my building, I slammed the door shut and locked it behind me, my hands shaking. I peeked out the window, expecting to see someone standing in the snow, but the street was empty. Still, the unease lingered, like a cold draft seeping through the cracks in the walls. That night, I woke to a sound, a faint scratching at the window. I sat up in bed, holding my breath, the room bathed in the pale glow of moonlight reflecting off the snow. The scratching continued, deliberate and slow. I crept to the window, my heart hammering. As I pulled back the curtain, my breath caught in my throat. A face stared back at me, pale and gaunt, its eyes wide and unblinking. It was the man from the corner, his scarf now missing, revealing cracked, frost-bitten lips curled into a sinister smile. His breath fogged the glass as he whispered something I couldn't hear. I stumbled back, grabbing my phone. But when I looked back at the window, he was gone, leaving only frost patterns where his breath had been. The snow outside was undisturbed, as if he'd never been there at all. The next day I told Mia about what had happened. She frowned, her face pale. "That's impossible," she said. "The guy they found in the woods, he died last night." The winter dragged on, the cold biting deeper than ever. I've since moved away, but even now, every time I hear the crunch of footsteps in the snow, I can't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see a pale face staring back at me. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, I still hear that whisper at my window. It was a night like any other in late December. Snow blanketed the streets of our small town, muffling the usual hum of distant traffic. I was the last one to leave the convenience store where I worked part-time, locking up after another slow shift. The clock read 10:30 p.m., and the bus wasn't running this late due to the snowstorm. "I'll walk you home if you're worried," Maria, my coworker, had offered earlier, but I waved her off. "It's only 10 minutes, I said. I'll be fine." She had hesitated, chewing on her lip. "Be careful, okay? There's been talk of strange things happening lately. Someone saw a guy standing outside their house last night, just staring." I laughed nervously. "Sounds like a bad Christmas prank." "Maybe," she said, her tone uncertain. "Just be safe." I tugged my scarf tighter against the bitter wind as I walked down the dimly lit street. My boots crunched in the snow, the only sound in the still night. Streetlights flickered intermittently, casting eerie, dancing shadows on the white ground. I tried not to think about Maria's warning. Halfway home, the cold seemed sharper, the silence heavier. That's when I first heard it, a faint crunch of snow behind me. I paused, glancing back. The street stretched empty, snow swirling lazily under the streetlights. "It's just the wind," I muttered to myself, trying to shake the growing unease. But as I continued walking, the sound returned. Steady, deliberate. Someone was following me. My breath quickened, fogging in the frigid air. I turned again, scanning the street. Nothing but snow and shadows. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling. No response. Only silence. I tightened my grip on my bag and picked up my pace, every step crunching loudly in the snow. The sound of footsteps behind me grew louder, closer. I turned a corner, hoping to lose whoever it was, but the steps quickened too. As I reached my building, I fumbled with the keys, glancing over my shoulder. A figure stood at the end of the street, just outside the circle of light from the last street lamp. They didn't move. I darted inside, slamming the door and locking it. My hands shook as I double-checked the lock. I peeked through the window, but the street was empty again. "Get a grip," I whispered to myself, trying to calm my racing heart. That night I woke to a strange sound. At first I thought it was the wind rattling the windows, but then I realized it was coming from the hallway outside my apartment, a slow, deliberate scraping noise. My heart thundered as I crept to the door, peering through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty. Then the sound came again, this time from my balcony. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the faint outline of a figure standing just outside the glass door. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The figure didn't move. Slowly, I edged toward the door, my phone clutched in my hand. "I'll call the police," I warned, my voice louder now. Still, the figure remained motionless, their face obscured by the frosted glass. Gathering every ounce of courage, I yanked the curtain aside. The balcony was empty. Fresh snow covered the ground, undisturbed by footprints. The next day at work, I told Maria what had happened. Her face paled. "You're serious?" she asked. I nodded. "Someone was there. I saw them." She leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. "Did they do anything? Did they say something?" "No, but—" I hesitated, thinking about the strange silence, the figure's stillness. "It's like they were just watching me." Maria glanced around the store, ensuring no one was listening. "You know about the disappearances, right?" "Disappearances?" My stomach tightened. Over the last few years, she said, people have vanished, always in the winter and always at night. No signs of a struggle, just gone. I stared at her, my pulse quickening. Why didn't you tell me this before? I didn't want to scare you, she admitted. But now, maybe you should talk to Mr. Grayson. He's been here forever and knows more about this town than anyone. Mr. Grayson? The guy with the old bookshop? I asked. She nodded. He talks about things most people don't believe in. But after what you saw, maybe it's worth hearing him out. That evening, curiosity got the better of me. I found myself knocking on Mr. Grayson's door. The old man answered, his face weathered and suspicious. What do you want? He asked, his voice gruff. I hesitated. I think someone's been following me. Maria said you might know about strange things happening around here. He stared at me for a long moment before stepping aside. Come in. Inside, his apartment was cluttered with books and old photographs. He gestured for me to sit. You've seen them, haven't you? He said, his voice low. Them, I asked, confused. The shadows in the snow, he said. They're not human. They watch, they follow, and sometimes they take. A chill ran down my spine. Take who? Whoever's foolish enough to look too long, he said, his eyes narrowing. But I saw footprints, I protested. They leave marks when they want to, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't let them in. Don't invite them closer. And whatever you do, don't acknowledge them again. I left his apartment feeling more unsettled than before. That night, I double-locked every door and window, but sleep didn't come easily. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of knocking. Not at the door, but at the window. The snow outside was untouched, but the figure was back, its face pressed against the glass, fogging the window with each breath. My phone slipped from my trembling hands as the figure raised a hand and pointed directly at me. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone, leaving behind a single, chilling message traced into the frost. We're not done. Story 3. The snowstorm had picked up speed as the clock neared midnight. I was the only delivery driver still working that night. The roads were treacherous, the kind of icy conditions that made every turn feel like a gamble. But the pizza shop owner had insisted we stay open. It's holiday season. People are ordering in, he'd said. By the time the phone rang for a delivery to a house at the edge of town, I was already tired. But there was something off about the call. They sounded weird, said Sarah, the cashier, as she handed me the order slip. Kind of off, and they didn't want to pay by card. Cash is fine, I muttered, grabbing my coat. Sarah hesitated, then whispered, just be careful. Okay, it's not exactly the safest area. I'll be fine, I said, forcing a smile. It's just pizza. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. No, really, something feels wrong about this. Can't you just call and ask them to confirm the order again? I sighed. It's probably just someone who's bad with phones, Sarah. Relax. Bad with phones doesn't explain why they kept asking if you'd be the one delivering it, she said, her voice dropping lower. They didn't care about the pizza. They just wanted to know about you. I froze for a second, her words sending a chill down my spine. What? When they called, they asked if you were working tonight, said they'd heard good things about you. I thought it was weird, but I didn't think much of it. Now, I'm not so sure. I forced a laugh to mask my unease. Maybe they're just a big fan of delivery drivers. Sarah didn't smile. Please, just be careful. The drive was slow and nerve-wracking. Snowflakes swirled in the beam of my headlights, creating an almost hypnotic effect. The streets became quieter the farther I got from town. The houses spaced further apart. Finally, I reached the address. The house was old, 2 stories with peeling paint and a sagging porch. No lights were on, and the driveway was unshoveled. Great, I muttered, grabbing the pizza box and stepping out into the cold. My boots sank into the deep snow as I approached the front door. I knocked twice, the sound dull against the thick wood. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. The wind howled, and for a moment, I thought I heard something else. A faint creaking, like footsteps on the snow. I turned quickly, scanning the yard, but there was no one there. Hello? I called out. A moment later, the door creaked open. A man stood there, middle-aged, with a gaunt face and hollow eyes. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me. Pizza delivery? I said, holding up the box. He nodded slowly. stepping aside. "Come in," he said, his voice low and raspy. "Actually, I can just hand it to you here," I said quickly. Something about the way he was watching me made my skin crawl. He shook his head. "I need to get the money from the kitchen. Come inside." "I really shouldn't," I said, glancing back at my car. "Policy says we're not supposed to go in." "Policy?" he repeated, his lips twitching into a faint smile. "You think policy matters out here?" My heart skipped a beat. "I'll just wait here," I said firmly. His eyes narrowed. "You're already here. What's the difference?" Before I could respond, another voice came from inside the house. A woman's voice, soft and barely audible. "Don't make him wait too long." The man stiffened, glancing over his shoulder. "I'll be back," he muttered, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. I stood awkwardly in the doorway, glancing around. The room was sparsely furnished with an old couch and a single lamp that flickered occasionally. On the wall hung a clock, its hands stuck at 3:15. Minutes passed. I began to feel uneasy. "Sir?" I called. No response. "Do you need help finding your wallet?" I added, trying to keep my voice steady. Still nothing. The silence pressed down on me, broken only by the faint creak of floorboards above me. My heart started to race. Someone was upstairs. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. Footsteps sounded from the hallway, and the man reappeared, holding a wad of cash. But his movements were slow, deliberate, and his eyes, they seemed darker now, almost glassy. "Here," he said, holding out the money. As I reached for it, his grip tightened on the bills, pulling me slightly closer. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered. "What?" I stammered, pulling back. Before he could say anything else, a loud thud echoed from upstairs. My head snapped toward the ceiling. "Who else is here?" I demanded. The man's lips twitched into a small, unnerving smile. "Just the others," he said. I backed toward the door, my pulse pounding. "I'll just leave this here," I said, setting the pizza on the nearest table. As I turned to leave, the front door slammed shut on its own, the force rattling the windows. I spun around, but the man was gone. The hallway where he'd stood was empty. The temperature in the house seemed to drop even further. My breath fogged in the air as I fumbled for the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. "Hello?" I shouted, panic rising in my chest. From upstairs came the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. They were heavy, unhurried, and getting closer. "Who's up there?" I yelled. The footsteps stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening. And then from the top of the stairs, a voice, soft and childlike. "Are you here to play with us?" My blood ran cold. I didn't wait for an answer. I threw my weight against the door, the wood groaning under the pressure. Behind me, the footsteps resumed, descending the stairs now, faster and more erratic. Finally, the door gave way and I stumbled out into the snow, gasping for air. I didn't look back. I didn't care who or what was inside. I just ran to my car, the cold biting at my face, and drove as fast as the icy roads would let me. When I got back to the shop, Sarah was waiting for me. "You're pale," she said. "What happened?" I hesitated, my hand still shaking as I placed the cash on the counter. "Did they say anything to you?" she pressed. "Not them," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "Someone else, upstairs." Sarah's face went white. "That house has been abandoned for years," she whispered. I stared at her, the sound of that childlike voice still echoing in my head. For the first time, I wondered if the storm outside had been the least of my worries. Story 4. It was a quiet winter night, the kind where the snow falls so thick and heavy, it muffles every sound. I had just moved into my small ground floor apartment a few weeks earlier. The building wasn't in great shape, but the rent was cheap and it was close to work. My window faced the street, but there was a small field of trees and snow-covered grass between the road and the building, giving it a sense of privacy. The snowstorm had been relentless that day, and by evening, it was piled high against the sides of buildings and cars. I sat in my living room, nursing a cup of hot tea, the dim light of a single lamp casting long shadows. Outside, the streetlights flickered faintly, barely cutting through the swirling snow. Around 10 p.m., I decided to head to bed. My bed was pushed up against the window, and as I drew the curtains closed, I caught a glimpse of something moving. At first, I thought it was just the wind shaking the bare branches, but then I saw it again, a shadow darting quickly across the field toward the building. I froze. My first instinct was to turn off the light, so I quickly flipped the switch and crouched by the window, peeking through a small gap in the curtains. The figure was moving closer, but I couldn't make out any details. It was tall, wearing a dark coat, and seemed to be dragging something behind them. Probably just someone trying to get out of the storm, I whispered to myself. But something didn't feel right. The way they moved, hunched and deliberate, made my stomach tighten. I watched as the figure reached the edge of the field, pausing just beyond the light of the street lamp. They stood there for a long moment, staring at my building. I stepped back from the window, my heart pounding. Maybe it was just a neighbor. Maybe they were lost. But the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. I decided to call the building manager. I grabbed my phone and dialed his number, glancing nervously toward the window as it rang. "Hello," Mr. Harris answered, his voice groggy. "Hi, it's Clara from 1B, I said quickly. "Sorry to bother you, but there's someone outside. They've been standing by the edge of the field for a while, and it's making me uncomfortable." "What this late?" he muttered. I could hear him fumbling with something on his end. "Are they doing anything, or just standing there? I don't know." I admitted. "They're just staring at the building. It's weird," he sighed. "I'll take a look at the cameras. Stay put. Don't open your door for anyone." After hanging up, I tried to distract myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the building, every howl of the wind outside made me jump. I turned on some music to drown out the silence, but it only heightened my paranoia. A loud knock on the window made me scream. I whipped around, my heart hammering in my chest. Through the gap in the curtains, I saw a face pressed against the glass. Pale, with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. The figure knocked again, harder this time, making the window rattle. "Hey, I need help," the person shouted, their voice muffled by the glass. "Please, let me in. It's freezing out here." I shook my head, backing away. "Go away, I'm calling the police." Their expression darkened. "Don't do that. You don't want to make me angry." I grabbed my phone and pressed 911, but before I could speak, the person outside shouted again. "You don't understand, they're after me too. If you don't let me in, we're both dead." I hesitated, the phone shaking in my hand. "What are you talking about?" They pounded on the window harder. "They're coming. They're watching us right now. You think I'm the one to be afraid of. You have no idea what's out here. Stop it," I yelled. "I'm not letting you in." Just leave. Their face twisted into something almost desperate. "You think you're safe. You're not. They like it when you're alone. When you're scared. You're already marked." The phone in my hand felt like a lifeline. "The police are coming," I said, trying to sound confident. "You need to go." The figure leaned closer, their breath fogging the glass. "They won't make it in time. You'll see." And then just like that, they stepped back into the darkness. The banging stopped suddenly. I held my breath, the silence almost worse than the noise. I peeked out from behind the couch, but the figure was gone. The snow outside was untouched, the field eerily still. Then I heard it, the faint creak of the back door opening. "They're inside," I whispered into the phone. "Oh my God, they got in." "Lock yourself in a room," the operator said firmly. "Can you do that?" I nodded, even though they couldn't see me. Clutching the phone, I ran to the bathroom and locked the door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the latch. Outside, I could hear faint footsteps, slow and deliberate. They stopped just outside the bathroom door. "I know you're in there," the voice said, low and taunting. I bit down on my hand to keep from screaming. "You should have let me in," they continued. "I just needed a little help. But now I'm mad." The doorknob rattled and I pressed myself against the far wall, clutching the phone like a lifeline. "Police are on their way," I said, my voice shaking. "You need to leave." The rattling stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then slowly, the footsteps retreated. I stayed in the bathroom until I heard the distant wail of sirens. When I finally opened the door, the apartment was empty. The back door swung open, snow blowing in across the floor. The police searched the area but found no one. "No footprints, no sign of forced entry," one of them said, shaking his head. "But they were here," I insisted. "They were inside." The officer gave me a sympathetic look. "We'll keep an eye on the area. Call us if anything else happens." That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind outside made my heart race. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale face grinning at me through the glass. Story 5. The blizzard hit the town harder than anyone expected. Streets were deserted, snow piled up against doors, and the sound of howling winds made it feel like the world outside was alive and angry. I had just returned home from my part-time job at the bookstore, and the warm glow of the fireplace was the only thing that made the storm bearable. My apartment was on the second floor of a small, creaky building. It wasn't much, but it was cozy. The windows rattled occasionally, letting in small drafts of icy air. I wrapped myself in a thick blanket, trying to tune out the chaos outside. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a text from James, my neighbor downstairs. James, hey, did you hear that noise outside? I think someone's in the backyard. I frowned and texted back. Me. It's probably the wind. Everything's been creaking all night. James. I'm serious. I saw something move near the shed. Looked like a person. I stared at the message, my stomach twisting. James had a habit of overreacting, but something about his tone made me uneasy. Against my better judgment, I got up and peeked out the window. The backyard was a blur of white, the shed barely visible under the heavy snowfall. Nothing moved. Me. I don't see anything. Probably just a shadow or the snow blowing around. There was a pause before his next reply. James, they're standing closer to the house now, right by your stairs. A chill that had nothing to do with the storm ran down my spine. I glanced toward the stairs leading up to my apartment, but my view was blocked by the wall. Heart pounding, I texted back. Me, are you messing with me? James, I swear I'm not. I think you should call someone. My fingers hovered over the screen, unsure what to do. Then came a knock, a slow, deliberate knock on my door. My breath caught, and I stared at the door as if it would reveal who was on the other side. The knocking came again, louder this time. Who's there? I called out, my voice shaking. No answer, just the sound of the wind outside and the faint creak of snow being compressed underfoot. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find for protection, a heavy fireplace poker, and slowly approached the door. My heart was hammering so loudly I could barely hear anything else. If you don't answer, I'm calling the police, I shouted. A voice, low and raspy, finally responded. Please, I need help. I'm stuck out here in the storm. It sounded wrong, strained, like someone trying to sound desperate, but not quite pulling it off. I tightened my grip on the poker. Why are you on my stairs? I asked. Go to the main door. There's an awning there. The voice didn't respond right away. Then softly, I'm too cold to move. Please, just let me in for a moment. My phone buzzed again. It was James. James, don't open the door. I don't think they're alone. A sharp knock interrupted my thoughts. It was more forceful this time, almost angry. The voice came again, louder. Please, I'm freezing. Let me in. I backed away from the door, clutching the poker tightly. I'll call for help, I said. Just wait out there. No, the voice snapped, losing its faux desperation. Open the door, now. Why don't you move to the main entrance, I asked, trying to stall for time. There's more cover there, and I'll call someone to help you. The voice didn't respond for a moment, and then it laughed, low, guttural, and unsettling. You really think they'll make it in time? My phone buzzed again. Forcing myself to glance at it, I saw another message from James. James, they're going around the side of the building. Check your back window. Adrenaline surged through me as I darted toward the window in my bedroom. Pulling back the curtain just slightly, I saw two figures moving through the snow. One was holding something long, a crowbar maybe, and they were heading straight for the back door. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to do something, but I couldn't move. Then my phone buzzed again. James, get out of there, now. James, where are you? I texted back, my hands trembling. His reply came almost instantly. James, not in my apartment. I'm watching from the woods. They've been circling your building for an hour. I didn't know how to warn you without them noticing. The scraping at the back door grew louder. They were trying to force it open. I grabbed my coat, my keys, and my phone, heart pounding as I tried to think of a way out. My apartment only had two exits, the front door and the back door. Both were blocked. The scraping stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then came the sound of glass shattering. I bolted for the front door, unlocking it as quickly as I could. As I stepped out into the snow, the icy wind cutting through me, I saw one of the figures emerge from the side of the building. Their face was obscured by a hood, but I could feel their gaze lock onto me. Hey, they shouted, their voice sharp and angry. I didn't wait to see what they would do. I ran as fast as I could, the snow making every step an effort. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. But I didn't stop. Behind me, I could hear their footsteps, crunching through the snow, getting closer. Up ahead, I saw a figure waving a flashlight. It was James, standing at the edge of the woods. "Over here," he yelled. I pushed myself harder, reaching him just as the footsteps behind me grew deafening. James grabbed my arm and pulled me into the trees. We ran together, the branches and snow concealing us as the figures shouted angrily in the distance. We didn't stop until we were deep into the woods, the lights of the town barely visible through the trees. My breath came in ragged gasps as I collapsed against a tree, clutching my sides. "Who were they?" I managed to choke out. James shook his head, his face pale. "I don't know, but they weren't here for anything good." We stayed hidden until the sounds of footsteps and shouting faded completely. By the time we made it back to town, the storm was beginning to die down, but the fear lingered. I moved out of that apartment the next week, and to this day, I can't look at a snowstorm without feeling the cold grip of terror. Story 6. The snowstorm had transformed the city into a white labyrinth. Cars were abandoned on the sides of the streets, their outlines barely visible under the thick blanket of snow. I was locking up the small public library where I worked part-time, a job I took to help pay for college. The storm had kept most people at home, so it had been a quiet day. Just me and the sound of wind howling through the old building's cracks. The library's central heating struggled against the cold, leaving pockets of icy air in the hallways. I was finishing up my closing duties, making sure all the lights were off and the doors were locked. The library was a relic, a 2-story brick building with creaky wooden floors and tall arched windows that looked out onto the snow-covered park across the street. It felt timeless and unnervingly isolated. As I walked to the front door, a faint noise stopped me in my tracks. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like a footstep on old wood. I froze, listening carefully. The library was supposed to be empty. I called out, "Hello?" "The library's closed." Silence. I told myself it was nothing. Old buildings make noises. The wind rattling a window, maybe. I tightened my scarf and reached for my bag. That's when I noticed the front door, which I was certain I had locked earlier, was slightly ajar. The heavy door swayed gently, a sliver of icy air seeping in. My heart raced. Had someone come in? Maybe a homeless person seeking shelter? I couldn't blame them, not in weather like this. Still, the thought of being alone in this massive, shadowy building with a stranger made my stomach tighten. "If someone's here, you need to leave," I said, my voice louder but shaky. "I'm locking up." No response. I walked to the door, intending to close it, but as I approached, I heard it again, a faint shuffle coming from upstairs. My eyes darted to the spiral staircase at the center of the library. It wound up to the second floor, where the archives and rare books were kept. The lights up there were already off, leaving the floor in darkness. "Hello?" I called again. "If you need help, say something." Still nothing. I pulled out my phone and texted my coworker Mia, who had left an hour earlier. "Me, hey, did you notice anyone hanging around when you left?" She replied almost immediately. Mia, "No, why? Everything okay?" I hesitated. Was I overreacting? Me, "I think someone's still here. I heard footsteps upstairs and the front door was open." Mia, "Leave. Now don't go looking for whoever it is." I wanted to follow her advice. I really did. But something about leaving without checking felt wrong. What if it was someone who genuinely needed help? Or worse, someone planning to steal the rare books? Reluctantly, I decided to investigate. I grabbed the flashlight we kept at the front desk and headed toward the staircase. The second floor was colder, the heat barely reaching this part of the building. My footsteps echoed as I walked between the tall bookshelves, the beam of my flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the smell of aged paper and varnished wood. I scanned the room looking for any signs of movement. "If you're up here, let me know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I won't call the police if you just leave now." A muffled sound, like a cough, came from the far corner of the room. I turned my flashlight toward the noise, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who's there?" I demanded. The beam landed on a figure hunched over in the corner, half hidden behind a shelf. They didn't move. My breath caught. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked cautiously. The figure shifted slightly, their head turning toward me. "I'm sorry," they said, their voice barely above a whisper. It was a man, his face pale and gaunt. "I didn't mean to frighten you." "The library's closed," I said, keeping my distance. "You need to leave." "I just needed a place to warm up," he said, his eyes darting toward the windows. "The storm. It's too much out there." I lowered the flashlight slightly, my grip on it relaxing. "You should have said something. I can call someone to help you." "No," he said quickly, almost panicked. "No police. Please." "Okay," I said slowly. "But you can't stay here. I'll help you find a shelter or something." Before I could say more, his expression changed. His eyes widened, and he pointed behind me. "They're here," he whispered. I froze. "What? Who's here?" "Don't turn around," he said, his voice trembling. "They're watching us." My skin prickled, and every instinct screamed at me to look. Slowly, I turned my head. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, landing on empty space. Nothing. Just rows of bookshelves. "There's no one there," I said, turning back to the man. But he was gone. Panic surged through me as I scanned the room. How could he have disappeared so quickly? The only way down was the staircase, and I hadn't heard a single creak. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. It was another text from Mia. "Mia, you need to leave. Now I've been reading about that building. There's a history of weird stuff there. People hearing voices, seeing things that aren't there. Just go." I wanted to tell her about the man, but something stopped me. Instead, I stuffed the phone back in my pocket and headed for the stairs. Every step felt heavier than the last. The library was suffocatingly silent. When I reached the bottom floor, the front door was wide open again, snow blowing inside. I ran to close it, locking it firmly this time. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, pale and shaken. Behind me, the faint sound of footsteps echoed once more, this time heading toward the archives upstairs. I didn't wait to investigate. Grabbing my bag, I bolted out into the storm, the snow biting at my face. Whatever was happening in that library, I didn't want to be there to find out. Story 7. The snowstorm was relentless, blanketing the entire neighborhood in a suffocating white stillness. It had been years since I'd experienced a winter this harsh, and the creaks of my old house felt amplified in the eerie silence outside. Living alone had always given me a sense of independence, but tonight, it was an unwelcome reminder of how isolated I truly was. The night had started out like any other. I'd made a cup of tea, wrapped myself in a thick blanket, and settled on the couch to watch an old movie. The sound of the wind rattling the windows was almost comforting, a natural soundtrack to the cozy warmth inside. But then came the noise. It was faint at first, just a soft crunch of snow outside. I paused the movie, straining to hear over the wind. My heart skipped when it came again, this time louder, closer. Footsteps. I grabbed my phone and texted my friend Emily. "I think someone's outside my house." Footsteps in the snow. Her reply was almost immediate. "Are you sure? It's probably just the wind messing with stuff. Stay calm. I know what I heard. They're walking around the side of the house now." Emily called me instead of replying. "Hey, it's probably nothing," she said, her voice steady but concerned. "Have you checked outside?" "No way," I whispered, peeking out the window from the edge of the curtain. "What if they see me?" The yard was a blur of swirling snow, but something caught my eye. A shadow moving near the shed. My stomach clenched. "I see something," I hissed into the phone. "It's not the wind." Emily was silent for a moment. "Okay, lock your doors. Do you have anything you can use to defend yourself?" I glanced around the room. A fireplace poker, and a kitchen knife, maybe. "Good. Keep them close. If anything happens, call the police immediately. Emily, what if they're just lost or need help? Then they can knock on the door like a normal person," she snapped. "You don't know what their intentions are. Don't let your guard down." I nodded even though she couldn't see me, and hung up. Gripping the poker tightly, I moved to the front door to double-check the lock. As I reached it, a loud knock echoed through the house. "Who is it?" I called, my voice trembling. No answer. just the sound of the wind and my own ragged breathing. "I'm not opening the door," I shouted. "Go away, or I'm calling the police." Still nothing. The silence was deafening. Then slowly the doorknob began to turn. My heart leapt into my throat as I backed away, clutching the poker so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Stop!" I screamed. "Call the cops!" The turning stopped. For a moment I thought whoever it was had left. But then came the sound of crunching snow again, moving toward the back of the house. My blood ran cold. I darted to the kitchen, where the back door was, and peeked through the window. A figure stood there, partially obscured by the swirling snow. They wore a heavy coat and a hood, their face hidden. They were holding something, a crowbar. Panicking, I dialed 911, whispering my situation to the operator as quietly as I could. The figure began to pry at the door, the wood creaking under the pressure. "They're trying to break in," I whispered into the phone. "Please hurry. Stay on the line," the operator said. "Officers are on their way. Is there a place you can hide?" I looked around. The pantry was too small, and the living room was too exposed. My eyes landed on the basement door. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. "I'm going to the basement," I whispered. "Okay, stay quiet and keep the line open," the operator instructed. I crept down the basement stairs, the old wood groaning under my weight. I cursed every sound, every creak as I reached the bottom and crouched behind the water heater. The cold concrete floor sent a chill through my body, but it was nothing compared to the terror gripping me. The sound of splintering wood came from above. They were inside. "Check every room," a voice growled. It was low and rough, and I realized with horror there was more than one person. "You sure she's alone?" another voice asked, this one higher pitched but equally menacing. "Saw her through the window earlier. No car in the driveway." "She's alone." "You better be right," the higher pitched voice snapped. "I'm not going to prison because you got sloppy." "Relax," the rough voice replied. "Just grab anything valuable and let's get out of here." "What about her?" the higher pitched voice asked. "What if she sees us? She'll be too scared to do anything," the rough voice said with a chuckle. "People like her never fight back." I clamped a hand over my mouth, trying to muffle my breathing. The footsteps grew louder, heading toward the basement door. I gripped the fireplace poker, my palms slick with sweat. The door creaked open, and heavy boots descended the stairs. The beam of a flashlight swept across the room, illuminating shelves and old boxes. I pressed myself tighter against the wall, praying they wouldn't see me. "Nobody down here," the high-pitched voice said. "Let's check upstairs again." "Wait," the other one said. The flashlight lingered on the water heater for a moment. I held my breath, my entire body trembling. Then mercifully, the light moved away, and the footsteps retreated up the stairs. I exhaled shakily, tears streaming down my face. The sound of sirens pierced through the storm, growing louder. The intruders must have heard them too because their voices became frantic. "Cops! We need to go! Grab what you can and run!" Their footsteps thundered through the house, followed by the crash of a window breaking. I stayed frozen until I heard the front door burst open and voices shouting, "Police!" Minutes later, an officer found me in the basement, still clutching the fireplace poker. He helped me upstairs, where the warmth of the house felt surreal after the freezing basement. The intruders were gone, but the police assured me they'd find them. As I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket and sipping the tea an officer had made, I couldn't shake the feeling of how close I'd come to something far worse. The storm outside continued to rage, but it was nothing compared to the storm that had passed through my home that night. Story 8. The snowstorm had reached its peak, turning the world outside into a swirling white void. It was nearly midnight, and I was driving the last delivery of my shift, in order for a farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The roads were treacherous, each curve a test of nerves and tires against the icy grip of winter. When the phone order had come in, Sarah at the counter had been uneasy. "They sounded strange," she said, handing me the order slip. "Didn't say much, but they asked 3 times if someone would actually deliver it." "Maybe they're just hungry," I said, trying to lighten the mood, or really excited about pizza. Sarah didn't laugh. "It's a weird area. Just don't hang around, okay?" The farmhouse came into view after a slow, nerve-wracking drive down a snow-covered country road. It looked old, the kind of place that creaked and groaned under its own weight. Lights glowed dimly through the windows, but the surrounding property was dark and silent, blanketed in thick snow. I parked the car and grabbed the pizza, my breath fogging as I stepped into the biting wind. The snow crunched underfoot, and I noticed how loud it was. Too loud. It felt like the sound carried too far into the silent night. Reaching the door, I knocked twice. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. Still no response. Just as I was about to leave, the door creaked open. A woman stood there, her face pale and drawn. Her dark hair was messy, as though she hadn't slept in days. She didn't say anything, just stared at me. "Hi, pizza delivery," I said, holding up the box. Her eyes flicked to the box, then back to me. "Come inside," she said softly, stepping back. I hesitated. "I can just hand it to you here." She frowned. "I need to get the money. It's cold. Just come in." Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The air was cold, colder than it should have been, as though the house had been left unheated. The room smelled faintly of damp wood and something metallic. My breath fogged slightly as I stood awkwardly in the entryway, clutching the pizza box. "I'll get the money," she said, disappearing down a hallway. The room was dimly lit, with mismatched furniture scattered haphazardly. An old grandfather clock stood against one wall, its hands stuck at 3:03. The sound of the ticking was loud, almost unnatural in the silence. I could feel the weight of the house pressing in on me. Minutes passed. I shuffled my feet, glancing toward the hallway. "Ma'am?" I called. No answer. "Do you need help?" I added, louder this time. From somewhere upstairs, I heard a faint laugh, childlike, high-pitched, and chilling. My heart raced as I stepped back toward the door. Just as I reached for the knob, the woman reappeared, holding a crumpled bill in one hand. "Here," she said, her voice flat. I took the money quickly, setting the pizza down on a nearby table. "Thanks. Have a good night." As I turned to leave, she spoke again. "You shouldn't be here this late." I froze, my hand on the doorknob. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer. Instead, she glanced toward the dark staircase at the far end of the room. "They get curious about visitors." A cold draft swept through the room, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. "Who's upstairs?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Her lips twitched into a faint, almost apologetic smile. "It's better if you don't ask." At that moment, the sound of footsteps echoed from the second floor. Slow, deliberate steps moving toward the top of the stairs. "I really should go," I said quickly, turning the knob. It wouldn't budge. "They lock it from the outside sometimes," the woman said softly, as if the statement made perfect sense. "What? Who locks it?" I demanded, panic rising in my chest. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs, followed by a faint whisper. "Is someone new here?" My blood turned to ice. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The woman stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, her expression unreadable. "You should run." I turned back to the door, slamming my shoulder against it in desperation. The wood groaned but didn't give. Behind me, the sound of feet descending the stairs grew faster, heavier, as though multiple people were running toward me. With one final shove, the door burst open, and I stumbled into the freezing night. I didn't stop to look back, didn't care if I dropped anything. I sprinted through the snow to my car, fumbling with the keys as the wind howled around me. As I started the engine, I glanced back toward the house. The front door was open, and several figures stood in the doorway, their faces obscured by the shadows. One of them raised a hand and waved. I didn't wait to see what they would do next. I floored the gas and sped away, the car skidding dangerously on the icy road. When I returned to the shop, Sarah was waiting for me. "You're back late," she said, frowning. "What happened?" "Don't send anyone else to that house," I said, my voice shaking. "What house?" she asked, confused. "The one at the end of Bramble Road," I said, pulling the crumpled bill from my pocket. "This one." Sarah stared at the address, her face turning pale. "That can't be right," she said. "No one's lived there for years." I looked at her, the sound of those footsteps still echoing in my mind. Then who did I just deliver to? Story 9. The snowstorm had turned the neighborhood into an icy, frozen wasteland. The streets were deserted, and the only sounds were the relentless howling of the wind and the occasional groan of the old house I now called home. I'd rented it a few months ago, charmed by its rustic appeal and the promise of solitude, but tonight that same isolation felt suffocating. I'd been watching the snow pile up from the living room window, clutching a mug of cocoa. The dim glow of the streetlights barely penetrated the swirling white outside, making the world feel smaller, almost claustrophobic. The heater hummed weakly, struggling against the biting cold. I sighed, wrapping the blanket tighter around me, when I heard it. A faint crunching sound coming from outside. It was so soft I thought I'd imagined it, but then it came again. Footsteps, deliberate and slow, crunching through the snow. My heart skipped, and I quickly turned off the TV to listen more carefully. The sound was unmistakable now, growing louder, closer. Someone was outside my house. Grabbing my phone, I texted my friend Jenna. "I think someone's outside. Footsteps in the snow." Her response was instant. "Are you sure? Could it just be the wind?" Number, it's footsteps. Definitely footsteps. Seconds later, my phone buzzed. She was calling. "Okay, stay calm," Jenna said, her voice steady but tinged with worry. "Are your doors locked?" "Yes," I whispered, peeking out through the curtain. "But I can't see anything. The snow's too thick." "Could it be an animal?" she asked, trying to reassure me. I hesitated, but the thought didn't feel right. Number, it's too deliberate. It's a person. There was a pause on her end. "Okay. Do you have anything to defend yourself with?" "I have a fireplace poker," I said, glancing at the iron tool resting by the hearth. "And maybe a kitchen knife." "Good," Jenna said firmly. "Keep them close. And don't open the door for anyone. If it gets worse, call the police." I nodded, clutching the phone tightly. "Thanks. I'll be careful." As soon as I hung up, there was a knock at the door. It was loud and deliberate, echoing through the quiet house. My breath caught, and I froze, staring at the front door from across the room. "Who is it?" I called, my voice shaking. No answer. The wind outside howled, and the house groaned in response. Then slowly, the doorknob started to turn. "Stop." "I'll call the police," I shouted, my heart pounding in my chest. The turning stopped, and for a moment I thought whoever it was had left. But then I heard it again, the crunch of snow underfoot, this time moving toward the side of the house. I grabbed the poker, my hands trembling, and moved toward the kitchen, where the back door was. Peeking through the frosted window, I saw a figure moving through the snow. They wore a heavy coat and hood, their face obscured. But what chilled me most was the object they were carrying, a crowbar. My stomach dropped. Panicking, I dialed 911, whispering into the phone as the operator answered. "Someone's trying to break into my house," I said, my voice barely audible. "They have a crowbar. Please hurry." "Stay on the line," the operator said calmly. "Officers are on their way. Can you find a safe place to hide?" I scanned the room, my mind racing. The pantry was too small, and the living room too exposed. My eyes landed on the basement door. It wasn't ideal, but it was my only option. "I'm going to the basement," I whispered. "Good. Stay quiet and keep your phone with you," the operator instructed. I crept down the basement stairs, the old wood creaking beneath my weight. Every sound felt amplified, and I winced with each step. Reaching the bottom, I crouched behind the water heater, gripping the poker so tightly my fingers ached. Above me, I heard the sound of splintering wood. They were inside. "Check the rooms," a rough voice said. It was low and gravelly, and I realized with a sinking feeling that there was more than one person. "You sure she's alone?" another voice asked, higher pitched but no less menacing. "Saw her through the window earlier," the rough voice replied. "No car in the driveway. She's alone." "What if she calls the cops?" the higher pitched voice asked, a note of nervousness creeping into his tone. "She won't," the rough voice replied with a sinister chuckle. "By the time they get here, we'll be gone." "Yeah, but what if she's hiding? What if she's watching us right now?" "Shut up and keep looking," the rough voice snapped. "We're not leaving until we've checked everywhere." I clamped a hand over my mouth, trying to silence my ragged breathing. The footsteps grew louder, moving toward the basement door. My heart raced as I heard the handle turn, followed by the creak of the door opening. "Check down there," the rough voice said. "Make sure she's not hiding." Heavy boots descended the stairs, and a flashlight beam swept across the basement. I pressed myself against the wall, my entire body trembling. "Nobody down here," the higher-pitched voice called, but his tone was uncertain. "Wait, what about behind the water heater?" The flashlight paused, the beam just inches away from me. My breath hitched, and I felt a bead of sweat slide down my temple despite the cold. "There's nothing," the rough voice barked. "Let's move. We're wasting time." Reluctantly, the light shifted away, and the footsteps retreated upstairs. I exhaled shakily, tears streaming down my face. The sound of sirens pierced through the storm, growing louder. The intruders must have heard them too because their voices became frantic. "Cops! We need to go! Forget the stuff! Let's get out of here!" Their footsteps thundered through the house, followed by the crash of a window breaking. I stayed frozen until I heard the front door burst open and voices shouting, "Police!" Minutes later, an officer found me in the basement, still clutching the fireplace poker. He helped me upstairs where the warmth of the house felt surreal after the freezing basement. The intruders were gone, but the police assured me they'd find them. As I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket and sipping the tea an officer had made, I couldn't shake the feeling of how close I'd come to something far worse. The storm outside continued to rage, but it was nothing compared to the storm that had passed through my home that night. Story 10. The winter storm had hit harder than anyone predicted. What was supposed to be a light dusting had turned into a relentless blizzard, blanketing the streets in thick layers of snow. The entire neighborhood seemed to vanish under the heavy, swirling white. It was the kind of night that made you thankful for a warm home, or so I thought. The house creaked against the icy wind, its old wood protesting the cold. I had moved into this rental 3 months ago, drawn to its rustic charm and quiet surroundings. Tonight, however, the quiet felt oppressive, almost stifling. I had been lounging on the couch with a mug of tea, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, when I heard it, a faint crunch outside. At first I brushed it off as the wind playing tricks, but then it came again, a deliberate, steady crunch of footsteps in the snow. My heart stilled. I turned off the TV, straining my ears against the howling wind. Someone was outside. Gripping my phone tightly, I texted my best friend Kara. "Me. I think someone is outside my house. I am hearing footsteps." Kara. "It is probably just the snow settling or the wind. Do not freak out." Me. "No, it is footsteps. I am sure of it." My phone buzzed seconds later. She was calling. "What is going on?" Kara asked, her voice sharp with concern. "There is someone outside," I whispered, my eyes darting toward the frosted window. "I can hear them walking around the house." "Did you lock the doors?" she asked urgently. "Yes, of course. Do you see anything?" I crept to the window and carefully peeked out through the curtain. The snow blurred everything, but I could just make out a shadow moving near the edge of the yard. "There is someone there," I hissed. "They are walking toward the back." Kara's voice hardened. "Okay, do not panic. Do you have anything to defend yourself?" "I have a fireplace poker," I said, glancing at it by the hearth. "Good, keep it close. If they try anything, you call the cops immediately. Do you hear me?" "Yeah," I whispered, though my hands were already trembling. "Are there lights on in the house?" Kara asked suddenly. "Maybe turn them all off. If they think no one is home, they might leave." I nodded even though she could not see me. "Good idea. I will do that." I hung up and quickly moved through the house, switching off every light. The darkness felt oppressive, and the shadows seemed to stretch and move in the flickering glow from the streetlights outside. As I returned to the living room, a loud knock shattered the tense silence. My breath hitched as I stared at the front door. The knock came again, deliberate and heavy. "Who is it?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. The only response was the howl of the wind and the creak of the house. Then slowly, the doorknob began to turn. My heart pounded as I grabbed the poker, holding it like a lifeline. "I am calling the police!" I shouted. The turning stopped, and for a moment, all was silent. But then I heard the crunching footsteps again, moving around the side of the house. My stomach twisted as I darted to the kitchen window. Through the frost, I saw a figure approaching the back door. They were bundled in a heavy coat, their face obscured by a hood, but the object in their hand was unmistakable, a crowbar. Panicking, I dialed 911. "Someone is trying to break into my house," I whispered, my voice shaking. "They have a crowbar. Please send help." The operator's calm voice was a lifeline. "Officers are on their way. Stay on the line. Can you hide somewhere safe?" My mind raced. The pantry was too small, and the living room was too exposed. My eyes landed on the basement door. It was not ideal, but it was my best option. "I am going to the basement," I whispered. "Good. Stay quiet and keep your phone with you," the operator instructed. The basement stairs creaked loudly under my weight, every sound magnified by the suffocating silence. I crouched behind the water heater, gripping the poker so tightly my knuckles turned white. Above me, I heard the sound of splintering wood. They were inside. "Check the rooms," a rough voice growled. "You sure she is alone?" another voice asked, higher pitched and shaky. "Saw her through the window earlier," the rough voice replied. "No car. She is alone." "What if she is hiding?" the second voice asked nervously. "What if she has already called someone?" "Shut up and keep looking," the first voice snapped. "She is not going to do anything. People like her never fight back." "You do not know that," the second voice argued. "I told you, this feels wrong. We should have stuck to the other houses." "You scared?" the rough voice taunted. "If you are going to back out, fine. Leave. But I am not leaving empty-handed." "I am just saying we are pushing our luck," the second voice muttered. My heart hammered in my chest as their footsteps echoed above me. "Check the basement," the rough voice barked. The basement door creaked open, and I heard heavy boots descending the stairs. A flashlight beam swept across the room, and I pressed myself tighter against the cold wall. The light paused near the water heater. My breath hitched. "Hey!" the second voice called from upstairs. "Let us just grab what we can and go. I have got a bad feeling about this." The light lingered for another agonizing moment before turning away. "Fine," the rough voice muttered. "Let us move." The sound of sirens finally broke through the storm. The intruders' voices grew frantic. "Cops, we need to go. Forget the stuff. Let us get out of here." I stayed frozen as their footsteps thundered through the house, followed by the crash of a window breaking. Moments later, the front door burst open, and I heard voices shouting, "Police!" An officer found me in the basement, still clutching the poker. He helped me upstairs, where the warmth of the house felt surreal after the freezing basement. The intruders were gone, but the police assured me they would do everything to find them. As I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket and sipping tea, I could not shake the image of the crowbar or the sound of their boots on the stairs. The storm outside continued to rage, but the real storm had passed, at least for now.